What's up, guys? Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports here for another double shot of Steelers. One of the questions that comes up from time to time whenever people come in to visit the HQ shop here downtown is, what's the difference between the daily shots, the podcasts that I do in the morning, one each on Steelers, Penguins, and Pirates, and this here double shot? And the correct answer to that is we're still figuring that out. Okay, I'd like to think of double shot as being a little more, interactive and interpersonal, even though I do take the J1Q submissions for the second segment of the Daily Shot podcast. The double shot is more like we're just talking back and forth the whole time. One of the things that has made it this way from talking back and forth the whole time is this idea that the Steelers might already have their biggest, most obvious hole solved. And I always feel like I've got to be the bad guy in coming back and saying, no, they actually don't. And today, we're going to invest some time here in the WR2 concept, but also the WR2 slot and the people that are around it. And we're going to be talking about this with Chris Halleck when he joins us after the break. What I want to get off my chest first and foremost is that I am anything but a Calvin Austin doubter. I am whatever the polar opposite of the spectrum could conceivably be from being a Calvin Austin doubter. That's me. I'm at the 180-degree mark from the Calvin Austin doubters. I have believed in this young man from the beginning. I believed in him through his injury. I saw the way he worked. I saw the way he battled. Most importantly, and this really jumps out when you're talking about Cal, I've seen him improve from week to week to week. It's something that he and I talk about quite literally after every single game. Win or loss. How'd you do, Cal? How'd you do? What'd you get better at? Well, I got better at this. I got better at that. Did you see that? Did you see this? That's who he is. He's not a stay stuck on the treadmill type. So this is when I say that there is no doubting Cal as it applies to WR2. I also feel comfortable saying that when Zach Azzani, the wide receivers coach, told everybody over on the South Side just last week, Cal is our WR2 right now. That was his exact quote. He's our WR2 right now. A lot of people took that as if Azzani had named Cal to that position. No. WR2 is a depth chart thing. It's not a positional thing. We're going to get into the positional thing with Chris when he comes in. So if you slot all of your wide receivers from the Steelers right now, you've got DK Metcalf at the top. And yeah, of course you've got Cal next. Because who else are you going to put next? Roman Wilson, who's still unproven? No. Maybe he can work his way to that. That would be a pretty impressive feat on his part. But at the moment, no. So yes, of course, Cal is too. But there are a bunch of reasons in my mind why Cal needs to be exactly what Arthur Smith has told me he's going to be, which is WR3. And we're going to get into that with Chris when we come back right after I'm pulling this off. The boss is still not here. Right after this.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
And welcome back, and we should be joined now by, hey, see what happens when the boss is away. Everything's just a little bit off. A little bit off.
How you doing, DK?
All right. Do you have a good Father's Day weekend?
I did. I had a great Father's Day weekend. We had my kids woke me up with breakfast in bed yesterday. Eggs and bacon, can never go wrong with that. It was a fun day. It was a fun day with the kids, and got to watch the final round of the US Open as much as I possibly could. I was kind of going back and forth between that and playing soccer in the backyard with my son. So, but it was fun. It was a great day. How about you?
That's awesome. My kids and the boss went to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia for the weekend with my brother and his family. And because someone has to continue doing the work, that's the way this company rolls. You know that, Chris.
Yeah.
We can't all ever go somewhere.
Right.
Okay. That's just kind of how that is. So I drew the short straw. I stayed here for Father's Day weekend. They were kind enough to call me and video call and pretend they missed me and pretend they were not having fun without me and all that other stuff. But they definitely were. She'll be back. And actually, they're all coming here. The kids are coming here tomorrow, too. So that's going to be my Father's Day gift a couple days late.
Nice.
So we were talking about WR2.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a feeling, Chris, that WR2 as a term has been conflated with X receiver and Y receiver and Z receiver. And if you can, just go through for everybody here what exactly we're talking about that's missing from this offense. What is the position that's missing? Not the slot on the depth chart, but the position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously your X receiver is taken care of in DK Metcalf.
Yes, it is. If he's healthy.
Well, yeah. But DK Metcalf at the top of his game and like all the time, he is your prototypical X, which lines up away from the strength of the formation. You pretty much expect him to be able to win in any situation. That's why that's your number one receiver. Your Z receiver is your prototypical number two. That is the other wideout that lines up with the strength of the formation. That can be a guy that is a little bit more versatile, a little bit more. I think Cooper Kupp in his heyday.
That's good.
That's a good example of what I'm talking about. Now, you might look at Calvin Austin and think he could kind of do some of the stuff that Cooper Kupp used to do, but just at a lesser level, because Cooper Kupp was an offensive player of the year, man.
Yes.
But that's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for a guy who can move in motion quite a bit, who can line up closer to the formation, who can run a lot of in-breaking routes, who can also do some things on the outside, like run your typical go route, run your corner routes, which Calvin has proven he can do. And that's why I'm intrigued by the fact that if for whatever reason, and I don't think it's going to happen, but if for whatever reason they do swing and miss, that Calvin being that guy isn't the end of the world. You'd like there to be another guy there, just so that you have the depth in case somebody gets injured. You're not really hurting, because if somebody does get injured, like if DK Metcalf gets injured, you're really, really hurting, and that's why you really need another guy.
I don't know that we can overlook that factor. I don't know that we can say if. That's why I keep saying that I don't think this is a want. I think this is a need.
Yes, 100%.
I mean need in the literal sense of the word. Need. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if anything, and you and I were talking about this out on the field last week at minicamp, if you're Omar Khan and you just went through a season where you got burned with that worst case scenario, meaning George Pickens got hurt, and your team that's taking the field on that Sunday does not have an actual WR1, that's on the GM. 100 times out of 100, that's on the GM. I can't believe, Chris, that someone as conscientious and diligent as Omar doesn't get stung by that.
Well, from everything that I've been told, which is why I'm pretty confident they're going to address it, they definitely felt a huge, gigantic sting and don't want it to happen again.
Can you imagine on that Sunday watching that team come out of the tunnel and you don't have a wide receiver? I mean, a true WR1, somebody to get downfield. Mm-hmm. That's a soul-crushing thing for a GM.
Yeah. And that's why, okay, let's just say realistically here, or theoretically, I shouldn't say realistically, theoretically, the Steelers trade for Romeo Doubs. He would be able to slot in opposite DK Metcalf, be your almost every down Z receiver. And then when he needs a spell or anything else, Calvin Austin can step in and do a fine job. If DK Metcalf were to get hurt and Romeo Doubs were to slide over to being your X most of the time, and then Calvin Austin steps in and he's your Z, it's obviously not ideal. And but anytime any team loses their number one, unless you are one of the few teams that have two number ones,
Cincinnati.
Right, Cincinnati, Dallas, I mean, it's
not a long list.
No, it's not a long list. But unless you're one of those teams, you're going to be hurting if your number one goes down anyway. But at least you'd be in a better situation with Doubs and Austin. And one of the other factors we have to take into account here is who the quarterback is and how many receivers are there going to be that he's throwing to that are going to be able to do things that match up with his strengths, which to me, watching Aaron Rodgers film and watching everything that I'm going through right now, timing is paramount when it comes to these receivers. Being good route runners is paramount. That's not always been DK Metcalf's calling card, but him and Aaron Rodgers have been spending a lot of time together, so maybe that works out. But Calvin Austin, to me, is a phenomenal route runner at this point. With the growth that he's had, he's not quite on that level where you're like, oh, he's an elite route runner, but he's made gigantic steps.
He really has. And that's something that when we think of Cal, I think the first thing that pops to mind is obviously all the speed stuff that came when he was coming out of Memphis and all the praise that related to his speed.
Yeah.
And Sauce Gardner saying that he was the hardest guy I ever had to cover. That was back in college time. It was a great line. Nobody forgot it. It's good stuff, especially coming from Gardner. That's right. Awesome. But the stuff that stands out about Cal, and I mentioned this in the opening segment, is that in any given week, Chris, he'll show you something different. If you think that there's a certain route, there's a certain hitch that he can't make, there's a certain turn, there's a certain play downfield that he can't do, he's going to be the one who surprises you. If you go back to, this was early Kenny time, whenever you had those passes, you know which ones I'm talking about, the passes over the middle where Cal just straight line, right? Just a hot knife through butter. Okay. And when Kenny would hit him, and it was the prettiest thing you've ever seen when it worked. There were also times where it really didn't work. Like the pass just wasn't there. Okay. But when it was, that was, I don't want to say unstoppable. Okay. But you had to have your safeties in a really awesome position to be able to prevent that thing from materializing.
The sequence I'm thinking of was in 2023 when they went against the Raiders, and that play that they ran play that they ran was your old. I mean, when I say old school, I mean old school from the West Coast offense, shallow cross, where Calvin Austin was running the post. And the Raiders were running middle field open, and so that was just wide open. Well, they tried to run it again the very next week, and Houston's like, okay, shallow cross has been in the NFL ever since the 80s, so we know how to defend that.
We know how to stop this thing.
And then Kenny Pickett was intercepted on that pass.
I know. Yeah. It was the easiest. You could tell, too. It was candy from a baby.
D'Amico Ryans is like, dude, come on. This is college.
Seriously,
level
you just put that on film and you're going to try it again. My point with that is that Cal used to be just that. And that's the way we used to think of him peripherally. Yeah. Okay. We used to go, Cal, he's that dude that runs up the middle. But then he became more than that. And then he became coming back to the football. And then he became other things down low and closer to the quarterback, a little bit more of a, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not ball security, but it just being there for you to get you a first down.
Security blanket. Yeah.
Yeah. Just right. Yeah. Ball security blanket. I always think of poor Ryan Switzer when I think of those guys. And that's everyone's going to take that in a negative connotation, but Switz had his place, man. Okay.
Oh no, he's also a smart football player. That's the reason why he's coaching.
Super smart. And that's also why Ben loved him, because Ben, the quarterbacks love the smart wide receivers, and Cal's one of those. And Cal can be that guy who helps out his quarterback. If you're coming back to the football, then you're adding a whole nother dimension to what you can do, because now you're presenting a different type of threat. You're having the defense prepare for you differently. The more Cal adds to his repertoire, look, I am not doubting Cal for the gazillionth time. And it's not about Cal. I don't think WR2 is about Cal. I think Omar is going to go get one. The question is, Chris, what's the impact of this player? Okay. Meaning, is it just going to be here's a 5th rounder from Mike Williams and maybe the coaches will use him and maybe they won't? Or is it another actual threat? Now, it does not have to be, you don't have $150 million growing on trees that you can go out and get yourself another Metcalf.
Yeah.
But you have to have another player who's in that mold who can step onto that field and make that difference. I don't believe that if Williams had been on the roster at the time that George went down, that he would have been playing. I still don't. I have no idea what it was to this day that they didn't like about him. But I don't think he would have gotten out there. You need to have somebody who can play that position. And you're not going to be able to be flailing for that transaction in October and November. You're just not.
Yeah, well, and ideally you have that guy on the roster not only before the season, but at least a few weeks before the season, because you want him to be part of the team development as much as possible prior to the start of the season, because you don't want a situation in which you are acquiring Mike Williams. And I have a theory that he wasn't picking up all of the responsibilities of the receivers in the Arthur Smith offense as quickly as they needed him to. That's my theory. I could be dead wrong. That's why it's a theory. It's not been proven, but knowing. Okay. I just went through, for those who haven't watched, I just went through the Chalk Talk for the game in which Aaron Rodgers criticized Mike Williams for not running on the red line against the Bills.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't on the red line. He was nowhere close to where the red line is. And for those who don't know what the red line is, that is the red line that's painted on practice fields 5 yards from the sideline. And it is meant there to be running, like for when receivers run a go route, they run along that red line. That way the quarterback has ample room on either side of the receiver to throw any kind of throw, a back shoulder or maybe even over the shoulder, but you bend it closer to the sideline if you have to.
But you got to be there.
You have to be there, and he was nowhere close to it. He was almost inside the numbers.
Jesus.
And so
that's a big whiff.
And so when Rodgers says after the game, he was supposed to be on the red line, so I threw to the red line, and it gets intercepted. That sounds like he's just calling a player out. But then when you watch the tape, he's like, well, if he's supposed to be on the red line, then he's not in the right spot. So if that was the thing, and that was an offense that he had gone into the season with, maybe he wasn't picking up all the details. Again, this is all
okay. I mean, that's a lot different than the play that won the game in Landover.
Correct.
Which is just Russell Wilson and everybody in the huddle just says, "Hey, Mike, go deep."
Yeah.
You see where those two reporters are down there in the corner, which is where we were actually.
Right.
Run toward them. When I throw the ball, pay attention to this part. Yeah. Catch it. All right. I'm just gonna throw you. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's go.
Yeah.
There they went. Ball game.
Yeah. I'm again. It's a theory on my point. I don't know.
I like it. I like hearing stuff like that because it gives us a little bit more of an understanding possible to what real possibilities are as opposed to narratives and stuff like that. I like seeing. I like seeing. Man, I'm going to say this. I mean, I like seeing that kind of accountability. I don't know that if I were the wide receivers, I would want my quarterback doing that every week.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why I don't like it being a public thing. That's something that probably should be behind closed doors. But
if it's a recurring problem and you're not getting support from your coaching staff
right
on that front, because that's one of the things that when you hear players complain about lack of accountability, remember the whole Najee Harris in Cleveland speech? Mm-hmm. Okay. That's what they're talking about. Yeah. They want people who are screwing up on the offense, or defense, to be held accountable because, as Cam Hayward's fond of pointing out, if 11 people are supposed to be doing something and only 10 of them do something, the whole thing goes to hell. Mm-hmm. Okay, it just does. So this doesn't really have anything to do with Cal, as Mark Cunningham keeps pointing out. Okay?
Right.
I just don't know that Cal has really added fully the outside receiver to his repertoire yet. He can work on it. He can get better at it. They can run certain plays that have him there. But for the most part, you're still looking for a guy. Now, what everybody wants to know anytime you bring up a hypothetical guy is, who is that? Who's out there? Is the free agency crop is not all that exciting?
No.
Is it a case more of, all right, now that Aaron Rodgers is here, do you say, hey, dude, I mean, it's, you can pick a guy here. Who do you want? Well, we can at least go and inquire. Maybe it's a trade. Maybe it's a different type of, acquisition. I don't know. Maybe it is a free agent. Maybe there is somebody that he looks at who's out there and he says, well, that guy, I can make that work. At that slot, I can make that work. What do you got, Chris?
So I would think the only free agent to me that makes sense, and they already brought him in for a visit, is Gabe Davis. Now, they didn't sign him. They didn't sign him right away.
Yeah.
Right. They didn't sign him right away because obviously there are concerns about his health. That's the reason why he's gone on, I think, now 4 visits and he hasn't signed. So it might be a situation where they brought him in for a visit, said, okay, heal up. We'll call you in a couple months. If you still don't have a job, we'll circle around and see if we, want to reconsider. Keenan Allen is an absolute no. Not only did he say on a TikTok stream or wherever that he doesn't want to play for the Steelers, but I reported in Friday Insider on our site, DKPittsburghSports.com last week, that the Steelers weren't considering him anyway, so that didn't break their hearts. Amari Cooper, Craig brings up Amari Cooper.
Hey, Chris, you didn't break up with me. I broke up with you. I would do the same thing,
Right.
The nerve of you.
Yeah. Craig brings up Amari Cooper. I mean, I think if you would have wanted to sign him, you would at least would have brought him in for a visit by now. It's beyond minicamp. I'm thinking this is going to be more of a trade. Now, again, you could look at Green Bay and their loaded receiver room, Houston, New Orleans. They might not be in a position where they're really considering trading a guy like Chris Olave. I know his name's been thrown out, and then the Saints have a terrible cap situation, and they could probably benefit from acquiring the draft capital and shedding the salary. And then, of course, everybody sees the whole stuff with Washington and Terry McLaurin, and I just don't think that's going to happen. In my opinion, throwing that out there, you're just getting yourself into another Brandon Ayuk situation. May or may not even happen. And then Leo brings up Aaron Rodgers' old buddy, Alan Lazard. Call the Jets, see if it's possible. I'm not saying that's what they should do, but if worse comes to worse, Alan Lazard would make the receiver room deeper. And he'd give Rodgers somebody that he's familiar with.
I like hearing from Matty Mack here. He says, hey, DK and Chris, checking in from Medicine Head, Alberta. I know DK loves Alberta beef. There's nothing like it. And I'm telling you, downtown Pittsburgh, the actual downtown is just a mecca for steakhouses. And they'll find some of the best steak, and they will get it from Alberta. Okay. But having it in Alberta where you can, not to get gross on you here, but you can almost hear the cows outside. Okay. There's mooing happening off in the distance. The beef is so fresh and so unbelievable. There's nothing quite like it. I have a question for Maddie Beck. You're way closer to Calgary than you are to Edmonton. How much are you guys enjoying it if the Oilers end up losing in this Stanley Cup final? Because I know what you Calgarians are like. Okay, I know about the blood that's in that. There's no feud like it in sports, the way there is between Edmonton and Calgary. Chris, to your point about the Packers in particular. Now, we're not talking about the meat packers in this case. That's Alberta. That's Wisconsin. Where I'm thinking the Steelers' observations of the Packers, that's something that I think people have to understand, that one of the stuff, when we talk about analytics in sports, we talk about the dynamics of roster studies and film studies and everything else. The real value of it isn't taking everything out to the 10th digit, the decimal point. Okay. Yeah. The real value of it is being able to look at 32 rosters, well, 31, your own, okay?
Yeah.
And say, listen, something's up in Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
They just drafted 100 receivers.
Right.
Okay. Here are the contract statuses for their older guys.
Mm-hmm.
And if this guy makes a team and this guy makes a team, there's no way they're going to keep X number of receivers. So they're a perfectly reasonable target. So if we go and chase a wide receiver now,
Mm-hmm.
we might preclude ourselves from being able to make a transaction then whenever the Packers do make their move and put a pretty good wide receiver out there to be available for trade.
The one thing that I'm thinking, and specifically when it comes to Green Bay, is that not saying that because I think Green Bay is going to be absolutely in the thick of things. I just wonder if they feel certain freedom, especially since Christian Watson's out. Because if Christian Watson were healthy, I think they look to trade somebody almost immediately. But I would almost wonder if they'd be willing to go into the season with Dobbs and then try to do like a trade deadline type move where they part with Dobbs and the one thing I'm thinking of is, okay, well, you don't want another potential if this is what actually happened, Mike Williams situation where he's acquired and then he's not used. Well, the good thing is Matt LaFleur is the head coach in Green Bay, and there's a lot of similarities between the way Matt LaFleur likes to coach offense and the way Arthur Smith likes to coach offense. So a lot of stuff might be familiar to him anyway. So I don't know, but I also think we're still kind of early in this process. I think we're going to get into training camp. Like by the time players report to training camp, I still think you're going to see the same roster the way it is now. Maybe they pull off a trade. I'm just not very confident of it before then, but I don't know. It might be a training camp move.
There's a whole lot of, I think so. And I think late training camp. Michael Mills says, I'd sign Gabe Davis. His injury recovery allows both Calvin and Roman to battle with someone who needs to prove himself as well. This can't be emphasized strongly enough. Davis was in the building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Saw him with my own two eyes. Yes, he was there.
With this scenario, and I get what Chris said earlier about how, well, they could still sign him. Sure, they can.
Yep.
But this scenario, there's a really, really, really high percentage of guys who leave that building, don't sign a contract, and are never heard from again.
Right.
Okay, that's the way this goes in the NFL. If they want you, they take you up to that room on the second floor and they push that piece of paper in front of you.
Right.
Okay. They do that. They don't wait around. They don't say, hey, let's have dinner on it or whatever. There's another flight. That flight, the return flight has already been booked. You're not hanging around. Okay. You're going right back to the airport in most cases, like literally straight back to the airport. You're either signing a contract, you're not signing a contract. Somebody saw something as it related to Davis's physical. So man, that to me is a red flag and a half.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's I think they were definitely interested, obviously, because they brought him in.
Well, but I think Sebastian says, yeah, well, except for Russ. Well, Russ, I mean, that was it. Okay, you can also throw Aaron Rodgers in there too. There was 70 days between Rodgers' visit and when those were both very different circumstances. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, they are different circumstances, and I do think every free agent visit is a little bit different. But I think in that particular case with Gabe Davis, the biggest concern with him is, I mean, he was actually cut by the Jaguars with the designation of a failed physical. So when a team is bringing a player like that in, they're probably not bringing him in just to play PS5 together or something. They're bringing him in to get a good look at him. Like
that's it.
I mean, they want to look at the physical. They want to do a physical. They want to do everything they possibly can. And then it could be a situation in which they're like, absolutely not, never going to happen. Or they could be definitely not now, but we'll call you in a couple months. We'll circle back around. If you don't have a job and you've healed up, maybe we'll bring you in.
It's rare too, where you see multiple physicals get, I don't know if it's physicals failed or whatever, obviously one with Jacksonville, but it's rare to see someone not pass that particular test with other teams and then sign with your team. Larry Ogunjobi is a real rare exception in that regard. And by the way, I mean, Larry O was hampered by that thing, by that foot, his entire time in Pittsburgh. Okay, that doesn't mean that Larry O didn't give his all and wasn't a model citizen and everything else. It just means that there was a real reason that teams pass on him, and the Bears in particular voided a contract.
Yeah. I mean, trust me, like, I think that if there were no concerns over health, Gabe Davis would be a Steeler right now.
Absolutely.
Because not only would you not have the concern over health, but it's the Kenny Gainwell situation with Gabe Davis too, because Gabe Davis's biggest game was against the Steelers in 2022, in which he went off for like 3 catches for like 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, that was his big game, and you bet Mike Tomlin remembers that game. So I remember that game.
The Tomlin scouting system. It really is too, because it's just what he remembers. It's the same way that he checks replays. He just looks up at the scoreboard. John Glink wants to know, what's the most you guys can see the front office willing to give up for a true wide receiver? The same third that they got for Pickens. I'll say this. First off, the way any executive ever answers this question is it depends on the player. And they're not lying when they say that. Okay. So if a spectacular receiver comes available, this is like if I ask, play along with me here. If I ask Kevin Colbert in the summer of 2019, what would you give up for a safety? What kind of draft pick? And he would say, well, I don't know, what kind of, we don't even really need it. I don't know what different. And then 2 weeks into the season, think if Fitzpatrick's available for a first. The correct answer is a first.
Right.
Okay. That's how you do it. And you don't even think twice about it. The Dolphins were just being dumb. You take advantage of it. So it's all relative to the player. Now, I could see the Steelers looking at their core of draft picks that they have, their amassment now that they have of draft picks, and saying, yeah, I mean, we got a third for George. We got a fourth coming for Dan Moore signing with the Titans. We know what our bracket is in general. But look, I mean, if somebody offers us CD Lamb,
right.
Okay, we're going to take it. Okay, we're going to do this.
Yeah. I think that's the situation. Like right now, the Steelers are probably playing in the ballpark of, we'd really, really prefer to give up a day 3 pick to get, and day 3 is as high as the 4th round.
But that gets you Mike Williams, though, Chris. Come on.
That gets you Mike. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, again, I think that should get you a guy like Chris Olave. And I understand people are going to hear that and be like, there's absolutely no way, he's too talented. Listen, DK Metcalf just went for a 2nd round pick. George Pickens just went for a 3rd round pick. And George Pickens has a lot of off the field baggage, and he just went for a 3rd round pick. Chris Olave has more concussions than he has NFL seasons under his belt. That is a gigantic concern for teams. And I'm being realistic.
Should be one for the young man too.
Right. So teams will look at that and be like, listen, the talent's not the question. It's the question of this dude's already had a lot of concussions. I think like 4 concussions already. I'm not willing to part with a day 2 pick to get a guy who might be missing the majority of the time because of concussions. I'm just not. So that's what I'm saying. 4th round pick for Chris Olave, or maybe a 4th or 5th for Romeo Doubs. Now, if Washington puts a for sale sign up above Terry McLaurin's locker and says, hey, we're going to trade Terry McLaurin, that's a completely different situation, because if you can then have DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin, I might be willing to give up a 1st round pick. I might be willing to do that.
Is there a more perfect? I can't. We're not start talking about Terry McLaurin. It's funny because when you and I talk about, and we haven't even mentioned this yet today, we probably should. When we think, and this, we happen to share this particular opinion about how this WR2, this mythical WR2 would fit into this. We're talking about somebody who can run routes like Deontay Johnson. Okay. Now you want other results in addition to running the routes. but that's the type of player when you McLaurin.
He's phenomenal.
What he does to get open is just, it's evil.
He is probably the most underappreciated top 10 receiver in the NFL. Because when you hear about like
is
the best,
still underappreciated though.
Yes, I think
okay.
so. I really think so. I like, because when you like hear like top, like I think the pretty much the consensus of like top 2 receivers are Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase in whatever order you want to put them in. And to think they were both on LSU in 2019, that's just stupid.
Yeah, right.
But then after that, like, I'm sorry, there's not that much of a drop off to Terry McLaurin. There's just not, because he does everything so well. And so, no, that would be, and that's why I don't think Washington's going to trade him. I think, especially when you see videos of Deebo Samuel, I like, it's reminding me of the Eddie Lacy situation in Green Bay. I don't see them. I just can't see them doing it. So I don't even open your mind to it. Honestly, I'm just saying hypothetically, if Washington called teams around and said, "Hey, we're doing this, we're trading him," then all bets are off. Then yeah.
You also won't be the only team chasing him. That's for sure.
Right.
I'll tell you, if you're one of those people who's just a football junkie to watch an extraordinary individual performance, you take the emotion and the heat of the moment out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Go take in that second half. Okay, he had against the Steelers in Landover. And don't worry who got burned and who wasn't here and who couldn't cover so-and-so and where was Minka and why don't they put more guys on him? Just watch him. It was a clinic and a half. And then, you also get the happy conclusion there.
Yeah.
With Mike Williams winning the game.
Running the red line.
He didn't need to worry about any red line. They just said, there's the corner of the end zone. Go get him, soldier. Dave says, I was all for George Pickens leaving, but it kind of feels like maybe they should have just ridden him to finish his contract and tell him it's audition year. Listen, if you think George was a bad attitude in his penultimate year of his contract, can you imagine what he would have been? I mean, he already was squawking about it, and then he did it right after he went to Dallas. He still couldn't shut up about not being respected and how he was expected to go into this season as a lame duck, whatever, as if he has achieved something, and he hasn't in the NFL. Making a highlight a week isn't it in the NFL. The greatest of the great wide receivers aren't known for their highlight catches. Okay, when you're thinking of a Jerry Rice, Antonio Brown, you're thinking of these guys who are just consistently able to produce volume. Mm-hmm. Okay, not necessarily one-handed and this and that and behind the back, and it's about production, and ultimately, name of the game, it's about points. And he's delusional when it comes to that.
Yeah. So 2 things.
20 touchdowns? He have 3?
I think so. It wasn't many.
3 touchdowns for the whole season?
It was not many. Let me pull it up real quick.
And he thinks he's in the TJ Watt bracket of being able to insist on a contract a year. This is his first contract in the NFL. He's still on his rookie deal.
Yeah, it was not very many for whatever reason.
3 touchdowns and 700 some yards,
something like that. It might. The 2 things on that entire situation. Number one, I think people think the receiver room is in a worse spot now than it was last year because they made the trade for DK Metcalf, and then they had the 2 number 1s on their roster, and then they traded George Pickens, so now it's worse.
Yeah, because everybody enjoyed that for about 5 minutes.
Exactly. You were fantasizing about the idea of, holy shnikes, defenses are going to have to run too high pretty much all the time because they can't afford to have only 1 safety back, because then you can pretty much throw the goal ball to whichever one's not covered by the safety. Get that out of your mind. Almost act like they were never on the team together at the same time, because in theory and in reality, when it comes to actual games played, they were never on the same team at the same time. So get it out of your mind. When you look at the receiver room now versus the way it was last year, it is a better receiver room. DK Metcalf is an upgrade over George Pickens. George Pickens can do things that DK Metcalf can't do when it comes to body control and contest. And as good as DK Metcalf is in contested catches, George Pickens can do things nobody else can.
And Cal's going to be a better player than he was, and Roman Wilson's going to be a contributor, unlike last year. The wide receiver room is stronger than it was. I don't think anybody could or should dispute that. And let's also remember that depending on how this stuff plays out with the running backs, I know Arthur Smith wants to get them more involved.
Yes.
If there was one more of those stupid little tosses to Najee Harris that he couldn't handle, oh my God, how many times did they do that? Like, what was the success rate of that play? Like 20%? You know what I'm talking about? A little dump off to Najee that he'd be facing the wrong direction. He couldn't catch. And you're like, really? You tried that again? Let's see if whether it's, I mean, Jaylen Warren can do this.
Yeah.
Okay. Caleb Johnson can do this.
Yeah.
Kenny Gainwell can do this. So that's also a part of this. Prime example of how you want to prioritize production over splash is right down there for all eternity in this franchise's history. John Stallworth, he was side by side essentially with Lynn Swann, who was all splash. Now the Swan was also very productive and got big touchdowns and everything. I'm not taking anything away, obviously. Okay. Right. But with Stallworth, it was all just, hey, look, 82's open. Oh, let's throw it to 82. How did 82 get open? Because he was smarter and better than everybody else on the field. Did you know, Chris, total aside here, did you know Stallworth was a minority owner of the franchise?
I did not know that.
I was doing something last night by accident, going through the Steelers media guide, and there's a picture of all the people who own the team. There's a bunch of people named Rooney, and there's Thomas Tull, and they've got their little headshots there and everything.
Yeah.
And right down near the bottom is John Stallworth, and there's a picture to prove that it's actually that John Stallworth. I had no earthly clue. Wow. Minority owner of the Steelers. Like, for all I know, he owns like, $5 worth or something. I have no clue. That just totally floored me.
Yeah, I had no idea. And like, I remember I don't remember how old I was, but I remember the day that I learned that John Stallworth had more catches over his career than Lynn Swann did. And you're like,
oh yeah,
it's like, Lynn Swann gets all the hype and everything because
the John Facenda, the highlights.
Yeah. He gets the highlights and he also won a Super Bowl MVP. And, every time there's like highlights of those Steelers teams, a lot of the time it's Lynn Swann making the catches in Super Bowl 10 against the Cowboys. But yeah, Stallworth was more productive. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, just when I think of Stallworth and what he achieved here, to do that simultaneously with Swann, it says so much about him and who he is and the type of toughness, the personal, mental character that he has, because he was never looking for it. He was even, by the way, I'm convinced that those two invented end zone celebrations. Feel free to correct me on this if anybody can. I am convinced. And it was so simple. It was just 82 and 88. They'd go into the end zone and they would do this like semi-orchestrated thing where they'd look at each other and just do like this long diagonal high five here. And I don't remember anybody else doing an end zone celebration other than a routine spike. I'm talking about like an orchestrated celebration. No, not Billy White Shoes Johnson dancing and not the icky shuffle. These are all things that followed. Okay. I'm talking about more than one person. This was pre-Juju rehearsing things all week. The way Juju in the end zone. What was the craziest one that they had? There was something. There was a phone that was inside the field goal post or something. Some mythical phone.
Oh, I don't know. so many stuff. Peripheral Saints asks, "So we reincarnate Hines Ward? He would fit this year's team. You know who would really fit this year's team? 2021 Deontay Johnson would fit this year's team.
Deontay. We keep coming back to Deontay.
I'm sorry, he would. He is one of 4 receivers in franchise history to have 100 catches and 1,000 yards in the season.
I'm going to go back a little bit further, and I'm going to do it for a reason. And that's I'm going to go to either Emmanuel Sanders or or Antoine Randall L. And the reason for that is they're about as adept, those two, as being capable of hurting you inside or outside as any Steelers in recent history. If you put Randall L on the outside, he was an equal threat. Heck, if you put him at quarterback. Okay.
Right.
Let's remember that too from the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Okay. You could put Antoine. I'm not just saying because he's giving him a plug here. He's a friend of mine. If you look at everything that he was able to do, that's the kind of player the Steelers could use, an inside-outside threat. I would throw Manny in that as well. Mm-hmm. Sanders was a guy who could hurt you either way. Obviously, way more proficient on the outside, especially after he left Pittsburgh, but he was able to play on the inside. That's what you want. Now, we do have people coming at us here, Chris, that are saying, hey, what about Roman Wilson? Are we forgetting about him? Is that what we're doing again? To which I say, go prove it.
Yeah,
the weight room is nice and all, and
it's go prove it for Roman Wilson. And listen, Roman Wilson, what he's done. Martavis, don't. There's a whole show we're gonna do on the greatness of Martavis that was wasted. But go ahead. Actually, I was thinking somebody else brought him up. Also,
Martavis.
Prime Juju would also be a great fit for this year's offense.
Juju from the 100th anniversary, the one that was in the commercial. That Juju, yes,
right. But I would say. Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson, listen, Michigan, what he did there, it was almost all out of the slot. High cross stuff. I mean, he can absolutely do some things in this offense that fit. When we talk about the Kyle Shanahan high cross series out of play action, that's all stuff made for Roman Wilson, running high crosses all over the field. That's fine. Have him run that stuff. Anything else, prove it. That's pretty much the way it is, because
I don't think it's more complicated than that. You can't roster build this way. If you bring in Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback, I've been saying this for months now, not just since he arrived. If you bring in Rodgers as a quarterback, you're changing the way you do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you're not going to say, hey, let's just build it with the kids. Okay. Now the kids have to wait to some extent. Okay. Caleb Johnson isn't going to be waiting. Derek Harmon isn't going to be waiting, but you get my point.
Right. But the one thing that at least with receiver, because I think you needed to do this, whether Mason Rudolph was the quarterback or Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback, whoever, you need to have another receiver in the mix, and one that can be closer to the top of the depth chart, just alone for if you do happen to deal with injuries. Because you're not going to go through all 17 games in which DK Metcalf is healthy, Calvin Austin's healthy, Roman Wilson is healthy, and everybody's healthy. That just doesn't happen. You're going to have a game in which DK might have to miss. Not you, DK, but DK Metcalf might have to miss. Calvin Austin might be out for a few games, with, a hamstring or a concussion, whatever. There are going to be games in which other receivers have to step up, and that's why you want to have another guy who can fit and play in a number of different roles, which is why we bring up guys like Romeo Doubs or Chris Olave or John Mechie from the Texans or whoever else, Alan Lazard from the Jets. You bring up a lot of those type of receivers, not because you're trying to look for another number one, because none of those guys are that, but they are another complementary piece that if and when needed, they can be the X, but most often they are a guy who can help complement play on the other side. So that's what you're looking for.
We're going to take one more today, and then call it a day here. This comes from James Richard, who says, this is of Stallworth, is combined for, the two of them, Swan and Stallworth, combined for 12 playoff touchdowns. That's an incredible figure. Yeah. On so many levels that they were in 4 games to do that, but then to 4 games times 3. So they combined for an average of 3 touchdowns at a time when, that was not the NFL. Yeah. The Steelers were very much a run-first offense all through the 1970s.
Especially the first 2 Super Bowls. I think by the time Super Bowl 13, because of the rule change, definitely, the offense definitely opened up more, because that's when you're like, the Steelers are like, okay, you're going to punish us by implementing the Mel Blunt rule, but now we're going to take advantage of it on the other side of the ball.
There it comes. You want to punish Mel Blunt? We're going to punish you for it. That's exactly it. And you also had a more emboldened, more confident Terry Bradshaw. Yeah. And you also had the quarterback functioning as your offensive coordinator. Don't forget how times have changed.
Yep.
Can't even picture that. He's literally out there. Number 12 is out there calling the plays in the huddle.
Yeah.
What else is he going to call for? He's going to call for 88. He's going to call for 82. Mike says, try to name a better duo than Swan and Stallworth. All things being contextual to their respective eras, there were a couple of teams. I mean, the Cowboys had, they had Drew Pearson and somebody else who was a real threat for them.
I've always thought of the Cowboys as being like a one-star receiver type. Like Drew Pearson was that guy for a long time. Michael Irvin was obviously that guy.
Yeah, receiver in the 1970s. It's going to say, I'm going to get a Drew Pearson. Oh, man. Only other notable receivers during that period. Well, Lance Allworth, but only till 1972, and that was the later version of him.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Hayes. Yeah, you're right. It was just Drew Pearson.
Yeah, that's what I've always thought of the Cowboys.
They also would get tight. They also had tight ends involved too. So
yeah. They were a very different offense than the Steelers were too.
Well, that's the other point here. When you're talking about the 70s.
Oh, geez.
What?
Sorry, I just see James says that's what Tomlin was running now, a 70s offense. No, it's not. No, it's not. Everybody assumes running the ball a lot means 70s offense. That's not what.
Yeah, and I'm not doing this. Isn't the 80s? I'm sticking in the 70s here for a comparable for Swan and Stallworth. I don't think you're going to find one. If you do, it's going to be on some losing team.
Yeah,
or somebody that would just like you didn't get to the hypo version of multiple receiver sets until the 80s when Dan Marino's group came in, Duper and Clayton.
Bill Walsh on the West Coast offense too, obviously.
And they came in, right, the 49ers with their group. The Chargers had the Oilers, the real Oilers, the Houston Oilers.
Right.
And everybody that Warren Moon was firing to. These are, but the 70s, give me two receivers from the 70s on the same team. I don't see anybody doing this. You're all failing. Come on, Randy Moss. It's 70s, I said. This is usually what everybody wants to talk about. Now I'm getting a Marvin Harrison dropped on my head here. Let's have some 70s. See, nobody can do it. Look at them. And usually all they want to talk about is the 70s.
That's funny.
But it's true, though. It's all anybody wants to talk about around here is the 70s.
But when you talk about
Dolphins was 80s, CJ.
No,
Duper and Clayton.
Yeah, 70s. Yeah.
You're talking the Bob Greasy team?
No.
Here we go. Finally, Sean Grass comes in with Biletnikoff and Branch. All right, now we're coming in here. Those, of course, were Kent Stabler's targets with the Oakland Raiders. And they were both really freaking good. So was Stabler.
Those Raiders teams were they should have won more, honestly.
Man.
But the reason they didn't is why people in Pittsburgh call the city of champions.
We just got body slammed here with Biletnikoff and Branch. I love it when that happens. I love it. Andrew Stafford gets our last word for today, says that John Stallworth does a lot of charity work in Huntsville, Alabama. His foundation gives scholarships to his alma mater, Alabama A&M, and other Alabama universities. He's a great player and a good person, and we'd be remiss always if mentioning players of that era who were drafted by the legendary Bill Nunn, in large part because the late Mr. Nunn, now rightfully in the Hall of Fame, was scouting schools of African Americans that weren't being touched by others in the NFL, and he was able to find tons of talent that was such a big part of those 4 Super Bowl championships. When we come back, we're going to take care of some business here on this particular program. As soon as I find the little transition, here it is. Taking care of some business here. CJ points out it was HBCU, the talent like Jerry Rice. Yeah, the amount of the amount of coups, the flat out coups that the Steelers got by being all over those traditional black schools in the South before anybody else was, that was such a factor, and it should never be overlooked in the great history of those great teams. Dave Knupp came in with one gift here. Jack Long says that John Stallworth himself was a prime example. Yeah, that's why I'm bringing him up. that's what brought it to mind. Dave dropped a 5 on us here and says that he was all for George leaving, meaning Pickens, but it kind of feels like maybe they should have just be gone with him. Michael Mills, welcome as a new member here. Maddie Mack checked in with us from Medicine Hat. We took care of him. Keith Dawson is another new member here. Stella Fierce dropped 10 gifts.
Thanks, Stella.
Onto the process. Here's no surprise. Carrie Russell with one.
She's always good for that.
I don't know if it's a she or a he.
Oh, really? Okay.
I never figured. These days.
Maybe I hear Carrie Russell and I think of,
Carrie Strug, the gymnast. I don't know who do. Are you thinking of? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the way to become a member here is to go to dkps.net/join. We don't have a membership update for you because the boss is still on vacation. She might or might not be here tomorrow. We were in the 2,400, 2,500 range. We need to, I'm not going to lie here, we need to come up with a pretty big push or we're not going to make it to 3,000. That's only 5 weeks away.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have some of our higher visibility programs between now and then. Think about it. It's kind of dead. So dkps.net, right. dkps.net/join is the place to go. I'm going to ask you, Chris, before we go.
Yeah.
Obviously the 70s Steelers were before your time. I mean, I was in single digits. So a lot of my memory is the same way, where it's in hindsight watching NFL films. I obviously was no expert in anything when I was 7 years old cheering them on against the Vikings. Okay.
Right.
But you go back and you watch them again and you study it again. Will we ever see something like that again? Or have we already? I don't know. There's people who debate that, because of the Patriots.
Are you talking about like just sheer dominance?
That domination. Yeah.
It's so hard nowadays with the salary cap, with free agency. Those were just things that didn't exist then. There were a lot more variables that made it, or there were a lot less variables that made it easier to keep a team together. That goes not just for football, but obviously other sports as well. The only way that I think you could possibly do it, that any team could do it, is with the right combination of coach and quarterback. And I think that's the reason why you saw it with the Patriots. You have an all-time great coach, but with the best quarterback of all time. And then right now with the Chiefs, you have probably a top 10 coach of all time with probably who will end up being a top 5 quarterback of all time. He's
going to be a top 5. I think he could retire tomorrow and end up having that designation, meaning Mahomes.
Yeah. So you're talking the only teams that could probably end up having that kind of sustained success. And that's why I put so much of this, like everybody wants to, not to try to go off on a tangent here, but I think that's why when people just want to hate on Mike Tomlin for the lack of playoff success over recent years, you have to kind of put it into context of like, listen, his quarterback play has been subpar since Ben blew his arm out. So it's just, when you don't have that quarterback play, your ceiling is only so high. And you're seeing it nowadays. You saw it with the Patriots for so long. You're seeing it right now with the Chiefs, with Patrick Mahomes, and the other teams that are in the way, what do they have? A phenomenal quarterback usually. So those are the only teams that I think pulled off. But 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, I don't know if everybody's going to match that, dude.
No, and I'm gonna get people to get all mad at me before we even sign off here. But the best of those teams didn't win.
76?
Or forget that. The 76 Steelers are like the 93 Penguins. where you just look at them and you go, wow, how did they not win? It's absolutely incredible. 93 Penguins had half of that team ended up in the Hall of Fame, and the same applies to the 76 Steelers.
I'll actually throw in, I'm not going to say, because I remember I've had debates among like all the Steelers teams that never made it to the Super Bowl that were probably good enough to win. I would throw the 2017 Steelers into a very, very similar arena. I thought they were a Super Bowl team before Ryan Shazier got injured, and I will die on that hill.
On that happy note, everybody, thanks to JMO for the last second couple of bucks there mentioning Drew Pearson and Tony Hill. I'm sorry, Hill was not in Pearson's class. No, we already got a correct answer on that one with Branch and Biletnikoff. We'll see everybody tomorrow, all right? Take care.